Betty, or as everyone called her, Big Betty, was a different kind of girl at school. She didn't look like the others. While many of the students wore fancy clothes and spoke with the confidence of wealth, Betty wore simple clothes and spoke with the humble tone of a mechanic's daughter. Her father worked hard in the dusty garage, fixing cars and making sure the family had enough to eat. Betty didn't mind being different, but the other kids did. Every day at school, she was teased and bullied. The loudest and cruelest bully was Robinson. He was the school's star, rich, popular, and always looking for someone to bring down. And Betty became his favorite target. "Why are you even here?" Robinson would shout at her, laughing as his friends joined in. "You don't belong in this school. You're just a poor mechanic's daughter. You don't fit in with us." Betty's heart would sink, but she tried not to cry. She knew they didn't understand her. They didn't know how hard her father worked to send her to that school, hoping she would get a chance to have a better future. One day, things went too far. During lunch, as Betty was walking across the schoolyard, Robinson and his friends were waiting for her. She didn't know what was coming, but she was about to find out. Without warning, Robinson grabbed a bucket full of something smelly and began to pour it all over Betty. "This is what you deserve," he said, laughing with his friends. "You're nothing but a fat, poor girl who doesn't belong here." Betty stood frozen, feeling the cold, disgusting mess soaking into her clothes. Her classmates around her laughed and pointed. Betty wanted to disappear. She wanted to run away and never come back. But then she thought of her father, who worked tirelessly every day to send her to this school. Betty's face burned with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she lifted her head, and with all the strength she could gather, she said, "I may be different, but I am strong. I am more than what you think of me. I don't need your approval to be proud of who I am." Betty, covered in the mess they had thrown at her, turned and walked away. She didn't need to stay there any longer. When Betty got home that day, she felt like a huge weight was pressing down on her chest. She had managed to keep her tears in check until she reached the front door. As soon as she walked into the house, she couldn't hold it anymore. The tears streamed down her face, and her father, who was busy fixing a car in the garage, quickly noticed. "Betty, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Betty wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Finally, she managed to choke out, "I don't want to go back to school, Dad. They bullied me again. Robinson and his friends, they poured something on me. I don't belong there. I can't take it anymore." Her father set down his tools and walked over to her, his hands warm and gentle as he cupped her face. "Betty, my dear, I know it's hard. I know they're treating you badly, and it hurts me to see you go through this. But you mustn't give up. You are strong, and you are more than they can ever understand." Betty shook her head. "But they keep saying I don't belong. They keep making fun of me. I'm not like them, Dad. I will never be like them." Her father smiled softly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "You don't have to be like them. You are special in your own way, and that is enough. Don't let their words tear you down. You are going to school because you deserve an education, and no one can take that from you. They may try to hurt you with their words, but you have to rise above them." Betty sniffled, still not fully convinced. "What if it doesn't get better? What if they keep bullying me?" "Then we'll fight back," her father said firmly. "Not with violence or anger, but with your strength. And if they continue, you report it to someone who can help you. Don't stay quiet, Betty. You have a voice, and it matters." Betty felt comforted by her father's words, but she still wasn't sure if she could go back to school the next day. She was afraid, but her father's encouragement gave her the courage she needed to at least try. "Okay, Dad, I'll go back. But I'll tell my teacher. I'll tell her what's been happening." Her father nodded and gave her a warm hug. "Good, I'm proud of you. Always remember, you are my brave daughter, and nothing can change that." The next morning, Betty went to school with a heavy heart. She was still nervous, still scared of what might happen, but she knew she had to try. She found herself walking slowly to her classroom, her hands shaking in her pockets. When she reached the door, she took a deep breath and walked inside. As she entered, her teacher, Mrs. Matthews, was sitting at her desk, grading papers. Betty hesitated for a moment before she approached her. "Excuse me, Mrs. Matthews," Betty began, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to talk to you about something." Mrs. Matthews looked up from her papers with a distracted expression. "Yes, Betty? What is it?" Betty gathered her courage, her heart pounding in her chest. "Some students have been bullying me. Robinson and his friends keep teasing me, calling me names, and yesterday they poured something on me. They said I don't belong here because I'm not rich like them. I don't know what to do." Mrs. Matthews stared at her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Betty, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe they were just joking. You know how teenagers can be." She went back to her papers without saying much more. Betty felt her stomach drop. She had expected a little more support, but instead Mrs. Matthews seemed to dismiss her. "But Mrs. Matthews, it wasn't a joke," Betty said, trying to hold back more tears. "It really hurt. Please, you have to do something. It's not right." Mrs. Matthews sighed, clearly annoyed. "Betty, I'm very busy right now. Maybe you should try to ignore them. I'm sure it will pass. Just focus on your studies and stay away from those boys." Betty stood there, shocked and disappointed. She had hoped for understanding, for help, but it seemed like Mrs. Matthews wasn't going to do anything. With a heavy heart, Betty turned and walked out of the classroom. The next day, Betty tried to keep her head down at school. She wanted to avoid Robinson and his friends at all costs. But Robinson had other plans. He had a new way to embarrass her, and he wasn't going to stop until he had done it. During lunch, Robinson and his gang spotted Betty walking down the hallway. She was holding her books close to her chest, trying to stay unnoticed, but Robinson smiled and whispered something to his friends. They laughed and followed him as he walked toward her. "Hey, Big Betty!" Robinson shouted. His voice echoed down the hall, and a few students turned to watch. Betty froze in her tracks. She didn't want trouble, but she could feel it coming. "Where are you running to, mechanic's daughter?" Robinson sneered, stepping in front of her. His friends formed a circle around them, blocking her path. Betty didn't say anything. She just kept her eyes on the ground, hoping he'd leave her alone. "Not gonna talk, huh?" Robinson teased. "Well, don't worry. I brought you a little gift." Betty looked up just in time to see Robinson holding a plastic bottle. Before she could react, he poured the liquid over her head. It was warm. It smelled awful. It was urine. The hallway filled with gasps and laughter. Some students covered their mouths in shock, while others giggled nervously. Betty stood there frozen as the liquid dripped down her hair and onto her clothes. She felt every stare, every laugh like a knife cutting into her. Robinson tossed the empty bottle on the floor and laughed. "Now you smell like where you belong, with the trash," he said, his voice full of cruelty. Betty couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to get away. Her heart felt like it was breaking, and the laughter ringing in her ears made her want to disappear. She found an empty corner near the janitor's closet and slid to the floor. She hugged her knees to her chest and let the tears flow. She cried so hard her whole body shook. "Why?" she whispered to herself. "Why do they hate me? Why do they treat me like this?" She thought of her dad, how he always told her to stay strong. But right now she didn't feel strong. She felt small and worthless. As she sat there, lost in her sadness, she heard a soft voice. "Betty?" She looked up and saw Mrs. Evans, the school counselor, standing there. Mrs. Evans had heard someone crying and came to see what was wrong. Her face was full of concern. "What happened, Betty?" Mrs. Evans asked gently, kneeling next to her. Betty hesitated at first, but then everything came pouring out. She told Mrs. Evans about Robinson, the bullying, and how he had just poured urine on her. She told her how the teacher didn't believe her when she tried to report it before. Mrs. Evans listened carefully, her face growing more serious with each word. When Betty finished, Mrs. Evans put a hand on her shoulder. "Betty, I am so sorry this happened to you. This is not okay, and you don't deserve this. You are not the problem. They are." Betty sniffled, her voice shaking, "But no one cares. The teacher didn't care when I told her." "Well, I care," Mrs. Evans said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again." She helped Betty to her feet and walked her to her office. Betty felt shaky and embarrassed, but Mrs. Evans' kindness gave her a small sense of hope. Once in the office, Mrs. Evans gave Betty a towel to clean herself and a cup of water to drink. Then she picked up the phone. Betty watched as Mrs. Evans called the principal. Her voice was calm but serious as she explained everything that had happened. Betty couldn't hear what the principal said, but Mrs. Evans nodded firmly. Suddenly, Mrs. Evans' expression darkened as she listened to the principal on the other end of the phone. Betty sat in the chair across from her, nervously wiping her tears with a tissue. She could see Mrs. Evans frowning, her grip tightening on the phone as the conversation went on. "But sir," Mrs. Evans said firmly, "this is unacceptable behavior. A student has been humiliated." The principal's next words were slow and cold. "Tell her she can find another school if she's unhappy here. Robinson's father has always supported this institution. He is the reason we have new classrooms and sports facilities. He is the one who ensures our programs are well funded. We cannot afford to lose his sponsorship because of one girl complaining about bullying. Betty doesn't belong here anyway, does she? Let her father send her somewhere else." Mrs. Evans froze, her jaw tightening. Betty, who had been listening anxiously, felt her heart sink to her stomach. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they weren't just from sadness. They were from anger. Was her life really worth so little to these people? Did money mean more than her pain? "Sir, this isn't about sponsorship," Mrs. Evans said, her voice low and trembling with frustration. "This is about doing what's right." The principal interrupted once more, his voice sharp and final. "Enough. I've made my decision. Drop it, Mrs. Evans. Tell her father to find her a different school if he can't handle this one. Good day." Before Mrs. Evans could respond, the line went dead. The principal had hung up. For a moment, the office was silent. Betty sat there, her chest rising and falling as she tried to keep herself from breaking down completely. Mrs. Evans placed the phone back on its receiver with a shaky hand. She looked at Betty, her eyes filled with sadness and apology. "Betty," Mrs. Evans began, but Betty didn't wait to hear the rest. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "So that's it?" Betty said, her voice trembling. "I'm supposed to just leave, because I'm not rich enough to matter." "Betty, please sit down," Mrs. Evans pleaded. "I didn't agree with him. I'm going to figure something out." Betty shook her head, her tears spilling freely now. "What's the point? No one cares. No one ever cared." Her voice cracked, and she ran out of the office, ignoring Mrs. Evans' calls for her to come back. She didn't stop running until she was outside the school gates. The cold wind stung her cheeks, but she didn't care. She just needed to get away, to escape the weight pressing down on her chest. As she walked home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal. How could the school, the very place meant to protect and nurture her, be so cold and heartless? She thought of Robinson's smile, his cruel laughter, and how untouchable he seemed. No one could stand up to him because of his father's power and influence. By the time she reached her house, Betty was shaking, partly from the cold and partly from the storm raging inside her. She opened the door to find her father working on an old car engine in their small garage. His hands were covered in grease, and he was humming a soft tune, completely unaware of the pain his daughter was carrying. When he saw her, his smile faded. "Betty, what happened?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. He could see the tears in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world was on them. Betty couldn't hold it in anymore. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't go back, Dad," she cried. "I can't. They poured urine on me. They laughed at me. And the principal said, he said I don't belong there because I'm not rich like them." Her father's arms tightened around her, his face hardening as she spoke. He didn't interrupt her, letting her pour out everything, the bullying, the principal's words, the feeling of being worthless. When she finished, her father took a deep breath. "Betty," he said softly, pulling back to look into her tear-streaked face, "you're my daughter. You're strong. And no amount of money or power can take away your worth. I'm proud of you, and no one, not Robinson, not his father, not that principal, can change that." "But I can't do it, Dad," she whispered. "I can't face them anymore." Her father's eyes filled with both pain and determination. "You won't have to face them alone, Betty. We're going to fight this. I don't know how yet, but I won't let them win." The next day at school, Betty went to the library during lunch. She sat in a corner, trying to stay away from everyone. She felt sad and tired from all the bullying. She opened a book, but couldn't focus. As she sat quietly, Robinson came into the library. He spotted her sitting alone and walked straight to her. This time, he was alone. "Well, look who's here," Robinson said with a sneer as he sat across from her. Betty didn't look up. She didn't want to talk to him. "You think you can hide in here?" Robinson continued. "You're such a loser, Big Betty, ugly, stupid, and poor. What's a mechanic's daughter doing in this school anyway? You don't belong here." Betty clenched her fists under the table but didn't say a word. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Robinson yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Betty flinched and slowly looked up at him. "I'm not going to stop, you know," Robinson said, his eyes cold. "You're going to leave this school one way or another. You have to pay for what your miserable father did to my mother." Betty stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Robinson leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Oh, you don't know," he said with a cruel laugh. "You really don't know. Typical. Your father's such a coward he didn't even tell you the truth." "Tell me what?" Betty demanded, her voice louder now. She was scared, but she needed answers. "What did my dad do to your mum?" Robinson's smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of pure hatred. "Go and ask your useless, pathetic father about a woman named Benita," he hissed. "Ask him what he did to her. Then maybe you'll understand why I hate you and why I will never stop until you're gone." Betty's heart raced as Robinson stood up, towering over her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You're just as pathetic as he is," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Go home and ask, you foolish girl." With that, Robinson turned and walked away, leaving Betty frozen in her seat. The library was silent again, but inside Betty's head it felt like a storm was raging. Her mind was spinning. Who was Benita? What could her dad have done to Robinson's mum? Why hadn't he told her anything about this? Betty's chest tightened as tears filled her eyes. She couldn't understand why Robinson hated her so much, and now he had dropped a bombshell that made everything even more confusing. She grabbed her bag and left the library, unable to sit still any longer. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Betty couldn't focus in class, couldn't eat during lunch, couldn't think about anything other than Robinson's words. By the time the final bell rang, she felt like she was carrying a mountain on her shoulders. When she got home, her dad was in the garage, working on a car as usual. Betty stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment. She didn't know how to bring it up, but she knew she had to. She needed answers. "Dad," she called softly. Her father looked up and smiled, but his smile faded when he saw her face. "What's wrong, Betty?" he asked, setting down his tools. Betty hesitated, clutching her bag. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Of course, what is it?" her father asked, wiping his hands. "Who is Benita?" Betty asked. "And what happened between you and Robinson's mum?" Her father froze, the color drained from his face, and he stared at her in shock. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice low. "Robinson," Betty said. "He said you did something to his mum. He said that's why he hates me." Her father let out a deep sigh and looked down at the ground. He seemed to be searching for the right words to say. Betty waited anxiously, her heart beating fast. "Betty," he began slowly, "Benita was a woman I knew a long time ago. She liked me back then. She thought we would end up together, but I never felt the same way about her." Betty blinked in surprise. "You didn't love her?" she asked. Her father shook his head firmly. "No, Betty, I didn't. I tried to make that clear to her, but she refused to let go of the idea. I met your mother later, and I fell in love with her. We got married, and Benita didn't take it well." Betty tilted her head, confused. "She was angry because you married Mum?" "Yes," her father said with a small bitter smile. "She felt like I betrayed her, but there was never anything between us. I tried to explain that, but she wouldn't listen. She hated me after that. I guess she told Robinson about it, and now he's taking out her anger on you." Betty frowned. "So, Robinson is bullying me because his mum liked you? That's ridiculous," she exclaimed. "They must be really foolish to think this is a good reason to treat me like this." Her father gave her a sad look. "I know it doesn't make sense, Betty, but some people hold on to anger and bitterness for years, and they pass it on to their children. Robinson probably doesn't even fully understand why he's doing this. He's just repeating what his mother told him." Betty sat down on an old chair in the corner of the garage, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is so unfair," she muttered. "Why should I suffer for something that happened before I was even born?" Her father came closer and knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Betty," he said softly. "You need to stop worrying about Robinson and his mother. Don't let their bitterness ruin your life. Look at you. You've been so stressed, you're getting slimmer by the day. It's not healthy, my child." Betty's eyes widened. "Slimmer?" she asked. "Yes," her father said with concern. "You're not eating properly and you're always worrying. I can see it in your face, Betty. You've been through so much, but you need to be strong. Don't let them win. Don't let them break you." Tears welled up in Betty's eyes, but this time they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and love for her father, who always tried to protect her. The next day, Betty walked into her classroom with her head held a little higher. Her father's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "Be strong, Betty. Don't let them win." She tried to focus on her books, but her heart still felt heavy. She knew Robinson wouldn't leave her alone. Sure enough, just as the bell rang for the first lesson, Robinson walked into the classroom with his usual smug look. He spotted Betty sitting quietly in the corner and smiled. He walked straight up to her desk, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, look who we have here," he said mockingly. "The poor daughter of a foolish mechanic. I'm sure you went home and asked your father about Benita. Now that you know the truth, what are you going to do? Cry some more?" The class burst into soft laughter, and Betty felt her cheeks burn. But this time, something inside her snapped. She had had enough. She wouldn't let him walk all over her anymore. Betty stood up, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're right, Robinson," she said loudly, her voice shaking with anger. "I did ask my father, and you know what he told me? He told me your mother is still holding on to a rejection from years ago. Do you know what that means? It means my father is hot cake. He's a real man, unlike your weak, foolish father." The class fell silent, their mouths hanging open in shock. Robinson's smirk disappeared instantly. Betty wasn't done. She stepped closer to him, her voice growing louder and more confident. "You stand here calling my father poor, but your miserable mother hasn't let go of him for years. My father rejected your mother, and it broke her. That's why she's still bitter, and now she's passing her frustration onto you." The classroom erupted into laughter, but Betty didn't stop. She pointed a finger at Robinson, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "You think you're tormenting me?" she shouted. "No, Robinson, you're only showing the whole class how pathetic your family really is. And since you love running home to tell your mummy everything, go ahead and ask her one more thing. Ask her if the man you call your father is really your biological father, or if she's still dreaming about mine." The classroom exploded with laughter. Some students banged their desks, while others clapped and whistled. Robinson stood frozen, his face pale and his mouth slightly open. He had never expected Betty to stand up to him, let alone humiliate him in front of everyone. Betty stared at him, breathing heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. "You better leave me alone from now on," she said coldly. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure the whole school knows how pathetic you and your family really are." Robinson's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. He looked around the classroom, seeing the mocking smiles and hearing the loud laughter. Unable to handle the humiliation, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the classroom without saying a word. Betty sat back down, her heart racing. The laughter and cheers of her classmates were still ringing in her ears, but she felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, she had stood up for herself, and it felt good. As the noise in the classroom died down, a few students came over to her. "That was amazing, Betty," one of them said, grinning. "I have never seen Robinson look so embarrassed." "Yeah, you really put him in his place," another student added. Betty managed a small smile. She wasn't sure if this was the end of Robinson's bullying, but for now she felt a spark of confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. Robinson stormed into his house, slamming the front door so hard that the sound echoed through the living room. His mother, Benita, who was lounging on the couch with a glass of wine, jumped slightly and turned to face him. "What is wrong with you?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Robinson threw his school bag onto the floor and flopped onto the couch, his face red with frustration. "It's that stupid girl, Betty," he shouted. Benita raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Betty again? What did she do this time?" "She insulted me in front of the whole class," Robinson said, his voice trembling with anger. She called you foolish and said Dad might not even be my real father. She said her father rejected you and that's why you're still bitter. Everyone laughed at me, Mum. She humiliated me." Benita's face darkened, her grip tightening around her glass. "What?" she hissed. "How dare she? That miserable girl and her wretched father think they can talk about me like that? I will make sure they regret this. They will pay for insulting us." Robinson leaned forward, his face pale with worry. "Mum, do you still love him?" he asked hesitantly. Benita froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. Her eyes darted to Robinson, then away. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "How can I love someone like that? That poor mechanic is nothing but a mistake from my past. Don't you ever ask me that again." Robinson swallowed hard, unsure if he believed her. "Then why are you so angry?" he asked curiously. Benita didn't answer. Instead, she got up and began pacing the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Let's wait for your father to come back," she said, more to herself than to Robinson. "We'll handle this together. That girl and her pathetic father will regret crossing us. No one insults this family and gets away with it." Robinson frowned, still feeling uneasy. "Mum, what are you going to do?" Benita turned to face him, her eyes cold and calculating. "Don't worry about that, Robinson," she said firmly. "Just focus on school. I'll make sure they pay for what they have done." Robinson nodded slowly, but his mind was racing. He had never seen his mother this angry before. It scared him a little, but he also felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Betty would finally get what she deserved, or so he thought. Meanwhile, Benita picked up her phone and dialed a number. Her voice was calm, but sharp as she spoke. "Hello?" "Yes, it's me. I need a favor." "No, not over the phone. Meet me at the usual place tomorrow night. This is important." She ended the call and turned back to Robinson. "Go to your room," she ordered. "LL will take care of everything." Robinson's father, Mr. Lewis, walked into the house after a long day. He barely glanced at his wife as he set down his belongings. "Lewis, we need to talk," Benita said sharply, stepping in front of him. "What is it now, Benita?" he asked, his tone tired. "It's about one poor girl, Betty," she said. "She insulted our family. She called me foolish, questioned whether you're even Robinson's father, and humiliated him in front of the whole class. Something must be done." Lewis raised an eyebrow. What did Robinson do to provoke her? Benita's face twisted in disbelief. "Why do you always assume Robinson is at fault?" "Because I know your son," Lewis replied. "Robinson doesn't back off easily. If that girl insulted him, it's probably because he said something first." "Are you being serious right now?" Benita shouted. "You are supposed to protect your family, but instead you're taking her side. You're weak, Lewis. That's why people like that mechanic think they can talk to us however they want." Lewis's expression hardened. "Don't call me weak, Benita. The truth is, Robinson needs to focus on his studies instead of picking fights with people. If you don't teach him discipline now, life will do it for him." "Don't blame me for how he acts," Benita snapped. "If you were more of a man, Robinson wouldn't feel like he has to stand up for this family all by himself." "Enough, Benita," Lewis said. "This isn't about being a man. It's about being a parent. You let Robinson do whatever he wants, and now look at the mess he's in. If he can't handle the consequences, that's on him." Benita glared at him, her anger boiling over. "You're pathetic. You're just going to let them insult us like this?" "I'm not letting anyone insult us," Lewis said coldly, "but I'm not going to waste my time on petty fights. Robinson needs to stop acting like a spoiled brat and focus on what's important. If he doesn't, he will have no one to blame but himself." Lewis walked away without another word. Benita clenched her fists, furious. Robinson, who had been listening from the top of the stairs, came down hesitantly. "Mum, what do we do now?" Robinson asked. Benita turned to her son, her eyes filled with determination. "Don't worry, Robinson," she said. "If your father won't protect this family, I will. That mechanic and his daughter will regret ever crossing us." That night, under the cover of darkness, Benita put her plan into motion. She called a group of rough boys she knew would do her bidding for the right price. "I want you to send a message to that mechanic," she said coldly. "Burn his garage to the ground. Make sure there's nothing left for him to call his livelihood." The boys nodded without hesitation, eager to carry out her orders. As the moon lit their path, they crept toward the garage with cans of gasoline and matches in hand. In no time, flames engulfed the small building, licking at the night sky as the fire roared. Betty's father's tools, machines, and years of hard work were reduced to ashes. By the time the fire was discovered, it was too late. Neighbors rushed to help, but there was little they could do. The once busy garage was now a pile of blackened rubble. Betty's father stood in shock, staring at the destruction. His hands trembled as he sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Why, God?" he whispered. "Why did you create me only to make me suffer like this? What have I done to deserve this?" Betty, who had come running at the news, found her father sobbing amidst the ruins. She knelt beside him, her own tears falling freely. "Daddy, please don't say that," she said, trying to hold back her emotions. "We will get through this. God hasn't abandoned us. He will send helpers our way." Her father shook his head, his voice breaking. "Betty, this garage was all I had. How will I feed you? How will we survive? I've failed you as a father." Betty hugged him tightly. "No, Daddy, you haven't failed me. You have done your best, and I'm so proud of you. We will find a way, I promise. Don't give up." The next morning, Betty sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. She didn't want to go to school. After the fire at her father's garage, leaving him alone felt unbearable. What if something worse happened while she was gone? Her father walked into her room and saw her still in her pajamas. "Betty, aren't you getting ready for school?" he asked softly. Betty shook her head. "I can't, Daddy. I don't want to leave you alone." "What if something else happens?" "I need to stay and help you." Her father sat down beside her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Betty, I understand how you feel, but you staying home won't change what's happened. You need your education. That's the one thing no one can take from you." "But Daddy," Betty's voice broke, "the garage is gone. We have nothing. How can I go to school knowing everything we've worked for is gone?" Her father sighed, his own heart heavy with the weight of their struggles. "Betty, I won't let this defeat us. I will find a way to rebuild, even if it takes time. But you're my hope, my pride. I need you to keep moving forward. That's how we'll get through this, together." Betty wiped her tears and looked at her father. His strength and love gave her a sliver of courage. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Okay, Daddy. I'll go to school, but promise me you'll take care of yourself while I'm gone." "I promise," her father said with a small smile. With a heavy heart, Betty got ready for school. She dragged her feet all the way there, her mind still on her father. At break time, she didn't join her classmates. Instead, she sat alone under a tree, her face buried in her knees. The laughter and chatter of other students felt like noise in the background as she replayed the events of the past few days in her mind. "Hi," a soft voice said, breaking her thoughts. Betty looked up to see a boy she had never seen before. He was tall with kind eyes and a curious smile. "Can I sit here?" he asked, pointing to the ground beside her. Betty hesitated but eventually nodded. "My name's Christopher. I'm new here," he said, sitting down. He studied her for a moment. "You look really sad. Are you okay?" Betty smiled, avoiding his gaze. "I'm fine," she said. Christopher leaned back, not wanting to push her. "You know, sometimes talking about what's bothering you can help," he said. "But if you don't feel like sharing, that's okay too." Betty looked at him, surprised by his patience. She wanted to tell him everything, the bullying, her father's struggles, the burned-down garage, but she couldn't bring herself to open up to someone she had just met. "Thanks, but I'm not ready to talk about it," she said softly. Christopher smiled. "That's all right. I get it. Can we still be friends, though?" Betty hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. But there was something genuine about Christopher that made her feel safe. "Okay," she said finally. "Great," Christopher said, his face lighting up. "Friends it is. And as your new friend, I'm going to make sure you're not sitting alone during break anymore." Betty couldn't help but smile a little. Christopher's kindness felt like a small ray of sunshine in her dark world. Betty was called to the principal's office later that day. She walked in, unsure of why she had been summoned. The principal, a stern-looking man with a frown etched deeply into his face, sat behind his desk. He gestured for her to sit down. "Betty," he began in a cold tone, "I've been hearing reports about some tension between you and Robinson." Betty blinked, confused. "Sir, He's the one causing the problems. The principal raised his hand to cut her off. I don't want to hear excuses. Robinson comes from a very influential family. His father is one of our school's main sponsors, and I can't afford to have unnecessary drama affecting our reputation. Betty's heart sank. But sir, he's the one bullying me. He poured urine on me, insulted my father, and... The principal slammed his hand on the desk, silencing her. Enough. I'm warning you, Betty. Stay away from Robinson or risk suspension. This is your last warning. Tears welled up in Betty's eyes. She stood up, her fists clenched. You're punishing the wrong person. You're supposed to protect students like me, not take the side of a bully. The principal glared at her. Leave my office, he said coldly. Betty stormed out, her chest heaving with frustration. She felt helpless, like the entire world was against her. She walked to her favorite tree in the schoolyard, the only place she could find a bit of peace. Sitting on the ground, she let her tears fall freely. Moments later, Christopher appeared, his cheerful demeanor replaced by concern. Betty, what happened? You look upset. Betty wiped her tears quickly, but it was too late to hide them. It's nothing, she said, her voice cracking. Christopher sat down beside her, his eyes kind but persistent. Come on, Betty, I'm your friend. You can talk to me. After a long pause, Betty sighed and told him everything. About Robinson's bullying, the cruel words, the urine incident, and now the principal's warning. By the time she finished, her voice was trembling with emotion. Christopher's face darkened with anger. How dare he? That spoiled brat thinks he can get away with anything because of his father. And the principal, what kind of coward does nothing to protect his own students? Please, Christopher, Betty said, her voice shaky, don't do anything. Robinson's father is a powerful man. I don't want you to get into trouble because of me. Christopher turned to her. Betty, you don't deserve this. Nobody does. Someone needs to stand up to Robinson, and if the principal won't, I will. No, Betty said firmly, grabbing his arm. I've seen what Robinson can do. Please just let it go. I don't want you to get hurt. Christopher looked at her, his anger softening as he saw the fear in her eyes. After a long pause, he sighed. All right, Betty. I won't confront him, but this isn't over. I will find another way to help you. Betty felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. Christopher gave her a small smile. You are stronger than you think, Betty. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. The next day at school, Betty was sitting quietly in the classroom, flipping through her notebook. She wasn't in the mood for trouble, but trouble found her anyway. Robinson strolled in with his usual swagger, a nasty smile plastered on his face. He stopped right in front of her desk and crossed his arms. So I heard you've got yourself a new friend now. What was his name? Oh yeah, Christopher, the poor ugly boy. Makes sense. You two are a perfect match. Two nobodies trying to act like they matter. Betty looked up at him, her heart pounding, but she refused to let him see her fear. Slowly she stood up and faced him. Christopher is better than you in every single way, she said. He's smart, handsome, kind, and God-fearing. Unlike you, he doesn't go around making other people feel small to hide his own insecurities. Robinson's smile disappeared instantly. His face twisted in anger, and the entire classroom went silent. All eyes were on them now. You think you are brave, don't you? Robinson said, You are nothing but the poor daughter of a worthless mechanic. I can ruin you and your stupid friend whenever I want. Betty didn't back down. You keep calling my father worthless, but guess what? My father is a better man than yours will ever be. At least he's not raising his son to be a bully. Robinson's face turned red, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles went white. He took a threatening step closer to Betty. You've gone too far this time. You'll regret ever opening your big mouth. Do your worst, Robinson, Betty shot back, but just remember this, you'll never be as strong as me. You hide behind your father's money, but I stand tall because I have something you don't. Courage. Robinson's entire body shook with anger. For a second, it looked like he was about to lash out, but instead he turned and stormed out of the classroom. A few minutes later, Christopher walked into the classroom with a book in his hand. He glanced around and noticed that the room was unusually quiet. Everyone seemed tense. Concerned, he walked straight to Betty's desk. What happened? He asked, lowering his voice. Betty let out a deep sigh and sank back into her chair. Robinson came to insult me again, but I stood up to him. Christopher frowned. What did he say? Betty hesitated but eventually told him everything. Christopher's expression darkened as he listened. That's enough, he said firmly. This guy has gone too far. He needs to be stopped. Christopher, no, Betty said quickly, grabbing his arm. Please don't confront him. His father is powerful, and I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. Christopher looked down at her hand on his arm and then back at her face. His fists relaxed, but the fire in his eyes didn't die down. Fine, he said after a moment. I won't say anything. For now. But if he ever lays a hand on you or says something worse, I won't stay quiet. I promise you that. Betty gave him a small smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Christopher. Christopher nodded, but inside he was still angry. He couldn't stand the thought of someone hurting Betty, and he silently vowed to protect her, no matter what. Meanwhile, Betty's father walked down the road, deep in thought. He had been struggling for days after the fire destroyed his garage. His heart was heavy with worry. How would he rebuild? How would he take care of Betty? The weight of his troubles seemed endless. As he walked, a man approached him. The stranger looked tired and hungry, his clothes ragged. Excuse me, sir, the man said, his voice weak. I'm hungry. Could you spare a little money for food? Betty's father hesitated. He had just enough for himself and Betty, but he couldn't ignore the man's plea. He looked into the stranger's eyes, and something about him seemed genuine. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the last of his money, handing it to the man. Thank you, kind sir, the stranger said, his eyes gleaming with gratitude. As Betty's father turned to leave, the man called out to him, Wait a moment, please. Betty's father stopped and turned around, surprised. What is it? The stranger smiled, and there was something mysterious about his expression. I'm not as poor as you think, he said calmly. In fact, I'm not poor at all. I wanted to test you. Betty's father blinked, confused. Test me? The man nodded. Yes, I wanted to see if you had the kindness to help a stranger in need. And you did. I was watching. He paused as if weighing his next words carefully. Tell me, what troubles you? What weighs on your heart? Betty's father was taken by surprise. He hadn't expected a question like that. He thought for a moment, then sighed deeply. My daughter, Betty. We're struggling. I had a small garage, but it was burned down, and now I don't know how I will rebuild it. I have no money left, no way to feed us properly. The stranger listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. Then, without saying another word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Betty's father. Take this, the stranger said. It's for you, for your hard work and kindness. Betty's father stared at the envelope, not knowing what to think. He opened it slowly, and inside was a check for an amount that made his eyes widen in disbelief. It was more than enough to rebuild his garage. And then some. The check was for a huge sum of money, more than he could ever have imagined. Is this real? Betty's father asked, his voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Who are you? The stranger smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I'm just someone who believes in kindness. Consider this my way of helping you. I don't need anything in return. Just make sure you do good with this money. Betty's father could hardly believe it. He had been given a gift he never expected. Thank you, he whispered, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you so much. But what's your name? I need to know your name so I can thank you properly. The stranger simply shook his head. No need for that. Just remember the lesson. Kindness goes a long way. And when you do well, help someone else in need. Before Betty's father could say another word, the stranger turned and walked away. He disappeared down the street, leaving Betty's father standing there in awe, holding the check and realizing that sometimes life had unexpected ways of offering help when you needed it most. Overcome with emotion, Betty's father said to himself, God really does work in mysterious ways. He couldn't wait to tell Betty what had happened. When Betty's father got home, he looked so happy that Betty couldn't help but notice. She was sitting at the table, trying to finish her homework, but she stopped and stared at him. Papa, why are you smiling like that? She asked, curious. Her father sat down beside her, still holding the check tightly in his hand. Betty, you won't believe what happened today. Betty put her pen down. What happened, Papa? Tell me. He began to explain everything. How he met the stranger, how he gave away his last money, and how the man gave him a check in return. Betty's eyes grew wide with shock and excitement. "Papa, this money is enough to rebuild the garage and even more," she shouted, almost jumping out of her seat. Her father smiled and nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yes, my child, it's more than enough. God is truly good." Betty hugged him tightly, her face lighting up with joy. "I told you, Papa, being nice always pays off. You gave that man your last money even when you had nothing. And see how God blessed you." Her father hugged her back, his heart full. "You're right, Betty. Kindness always comes back to you, even when you least expect it." Betty pulled away, a playful smile creeping onto her face. "But wait, Papa. What if that stranger was sent by someone we know?" Her father raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" Betty leaned closer like she was telling a big secret. "What if it was Robinson's mother? Maybe she still likes you and wanted to help you secretly." Her father's face turned serious, and he shook his head quickly. "Betty, God forbid. Don't even say such a thing. That woman. Never. I'd rather sleep on the street." Betty burst into laughter, seeing how upset he got. "Relax, Papa. I was only joking. Look at your face." Her father sighed, but couldn't help smiling a little. "Betty, you and your jokes will be the end of me one day. But let me tell you this. Your mother was my one and only love. Nobody, not even Robinson's mother, could ever take her place." Betty smiled, her heart full of pride. "I know, Papa. Mama was the best. And now, with this money, we can rebuild the garage and move on." Her father nodded. "Yes, we can, but we still need to find out who burned down the garage. Whoever did this must pay for it." Betty's smile faded as she thought about it. "Do you think we will ever find out who it was? And what about the stranger? Do you think we will ever know who he really is?" Her father sighed. "Only time will tell, Betty. But for now, let's be grateful for this blessing." Dear viewers, what do you think will happen next? Will Betty and her father find out who the mysterious stranger is? And will they uncover the truth about who burnt the garage? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you'll be the first to watch part 2. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.